Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about learning theory. This doesn't have a ton to do directly with critical thinking or logic, but I think that if you can appreciate some of the things that went into the design of the course and my approach to teaching critical thinking and logic to you, that will help you cope better with how the course is arranged and how to do better in the course yourself. All right, so I've got a couple of things to say about how people learn. The first thing is that specifically, most importantly for critical thinking and logic, for learning how to think better, there's an obstacle that we have to kind of overcome. Now this is something that everyone needs to overcome for every course, but it's particularly relevant for this course, and it involves something called game theory. Game theory is the study of games. So academics like to suck the life and fun out of everything, and game theory is one of the things that they look at. They study games and how to best play them, how to ideally play games. And so one of the main components of game theory is trying to analyze the moves in a particular game. And so we're not going to be playing a particular game. It's maybe more accurate to call what we're doing here decision theory, because we're trying to make a decision. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out the possible decisions that we could make, and then we also have to know ways that the world could be, because it's the interaction between those two things that is going to determine the outcomes of a decision. So in this particular case, I want you to think about intelligence, your intelligence, because this course specifically is about increasing your intelligence in particular ways, helping you become better at thinking. And if intelligence isn't defined as someone who thinks well, then we're at least in the ballpark, right? So this is super relevant. Now, psychology's been around for 100 years or so, done a lot of great things, developed well, but it's still really young. And one of the things that psychologists are still intensely studying and haven't figured out a lot of quite yet, ask any psychologist, they'll tell you they think they know quite a bit about intelligence, but there's still a ton of really fundamental stuff to learn. And one of the things that they haven't really got a good handle on yet is our intelligence and how capable it is of growing and developing, and what really kind of factors into helping it grow and develop the best, and whether there's a limit on any of that stuff. We simply don't know yet. And so there's really some ignorance in all of us about which of these two possible worlds we could be living in. We could be living in a world where our biology just works such that brains are kind of have a particular set capacity for thinking, a specific set processing speed or something like that they just can't change. And whatever that is, however intelligence is biologically based, this is the world where it's kind of fixed, or at least has some kind of upper ceiling to it. In contrast, we could be living in a world where your intelligence is variable. How much? Don't know. But the main contrast here is that in this world, while biology might constrain you a little bit, in this world there could be a lot of flexibility in your upper limit or your ability to develop your own intelligence. We don't know which of these two worlds we're in. What we do have control over is our attitude and perspective about our own learning and about our capacity to develop our ability to think, our speed of thinking, the correctness of our thinking, the ways that we think. So we can be of the attitude that, it's all biologically fixed. I'm as smart as I can get. The things, if there's anything that influences my intelligence, it's out of my control. This is called in the literature the fixed mindset. Or we could be of the attitude that I could possibly get smarter, that there are some things that are under my control that can increase my intelligence, right? So this stuff right here is our decision. We can choose to adopt one of these two mindsets. We can't control which actual world we live in. The key thing that I want to really kind of drive home here is that even though we have no control over which of those two possible worlds that we actually live in, even though we have no control over the fact of the matter about whether or not we can learn to learn better, whether we can learn to be smarter, or any of those other kinds of facets of intelligence or mental capacity, that there's one thing that we know for sure, and that is if you don't think that you can grow, that is, if you adopt the fixed mindset, then for sure there won't be any growth in your intelligence, because your decision has kind of, even if we happen to be in a world where intelligence can be developed and nurtured and grow and increase past whatever kind of limit that you're currently operating under, if you're of the fixed mindset, then you're not going to see any of that growth because you're not going to try. About the only possible way that you would see growth in intelligence if you had a fixed mindset is if it happened by accident, or if it happened while you were kind of trying not to make it happen, right? And a totally incidental growth in your intelligence. In contrast, if you have a growth mindset, then if we do happen to live in a world where your intelligence is at least partly under your control, then there is a possibility for growth. If we happen to be in the world where your intelligence is basically out of your control, it's biologically fixed, it's inherited, or it's influenced by elements of your upbringing and those kinds of things over which you've had no control, and they're already kind of baked into what you've got to work with, then we're still stuck in the no growth area, right? But this is the only possible square of the four possibilities that's got something positive in it, and we can't control which column we're in, but we can control which row we're in. And unfortunately, lots of education kind of assumes that people are fixed, that intelligence is fixed. And so education, while it does say, school is for learning, when it gets oriented more towards gatekeeping and testing, when the evaluation of how smart you currently are dominates too much, then that promotes a fixed mindset. It's not about learning, it's not about growing, it's about establishing where you are on the overall scale of intelligence or knowledge or whatever it is that they are trying to measure, which discourages a growth mindset in all sorts of ways. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with this course is build it, shape it, design it to try and promote this growth mindset. But you have to buy into it too. If you fundamentally are of the belief that we live in a world where your intelligence is fixed, then at best you're gonna kind of go through the motions of this course, and it's not going to really impact you long term. You could totally get an A in this course having a fixed mindset. But probably what's going to happen is after this course is over, you're going to treat it like every other course, and you're going to go, well, that was nice, or that was awful, or that was a brutal 3 weeks of summer, or whatever it was, and move on, and maybe forget lots of it, and not have any growth. And so I'm just asking, if you think that becoming smarter might be a useful thing for you, then give it a chance. But this is going to take some work, and I am going to remind you from time to time, right, to make sure you are actively working to adopt that growth mindset so that the kinds of things that we're going to be learning in this course get a chance to work. And if we are lucky enough to exist in this world where you have some control over your intelligence, then this course might help it get better, right? And so in general, yeah, a growth mindset is essential for kind of all learning, even though we do learn things when we think intelligence is fixed, right? But we learn facts, not ways of thinking. And since this course is not really about learning facts, though you can fool yourself into thinking that's what it is, it's more about learning a new way of thinking, an improved and refined way of thinking, then we really do need that growth mindset. The second aspect, the second learning theory that I use in this course is called scaffolding. And this is something that you have probably already experienced. Grade school teachers are taught this sort of thing, and curricula that exist in primary and secondary schools are shaped by this. Not so much university, though it kind of happens in fits and starts. And the idea with scaffolding is that you want to break up a student's learning into reasonable, accomplishable stages. And this should be familiar to you from any sort of learning experience that you've had, because we've all had experiences both in and out of school where we either have been told to learn something or we've actively wanted to learn something and we're trying to learn it, but it's way too complicated. The thing that we're trying to learn is just bewilderingly complex and just is incomprehensible. You can't figure out how to do it, right? So think something simple like riding a bike. There were, at the start, just insurmountable barriers to success there. You couldn't balance on the bike, kept falling over, couldn't do all the actions, keep your balance, hands on the handlebars to keep the bike relatively straight, pedal, shift your weight, all of those things that have to kind of happen in unison, coordinated in a kind of a knowledgeable and expert manner. You weren't even aware that all those things had to happen, right? So the end goal of riding a bike successfully without falling over was very far from your ability. And if you didn't get taught in stages like with training wheels or with somebody running along beside you trying to help keep the bike more stable than you were capable of keeping it yourself, those kinds of things, then it would have been a lot harder, maybe even impossible, to learn how to ride a bike. And so that's scaffolding, right? So you try and break up the overall goal into more manageable steps so that each step is accomplishable on its own, so that you can eventually reach the goal that otherwise you probably wouldn't be able to reach because it was too far away. And so what I'm trying to do consciously in this course is break things up. That's why we're using modules and having sequences of activities and assignments, especially in the argument mapping and evaluation component of the course, is because I'm trying to get you to learn critical, fundamental first steps, and then we build on those so that at the end you get the whole package. You know what to do. What that means for you, though, is that even though the whole thing might seem bewildering all at once, especially when you get to one of the subsequent videos here where I give you an overview of what argument analysis and evaluation involves, it's going to look pretty complex. Plus, you're also probably going to be skeptical about its actual usefulness. I don't know that I'll be able to fix that until way later. But the thing that I really wanted to say that you can do to be a good student and cope well with this kind of layout and design of a course is pay attention to every step. Don't try and skip a step. Don't try and just accomplish the step without appreciating the things that step is meant to help you do. Because if you kind of try and cheat a step, then it will just make the next step that much taller, that much harder to scale. So If you find a step suspiciously easy, that might just be because you've got some aptitude for it. You've learned something somewhere else that you're bringing to this course, and that's great. It could be that you just kind of like are a good test taker, good grinder, and so you can like guess correct answers without knowing why those are the correct answers. Really, it's those kind of strategies that I'm going to discourage you from trying to take, because if you kind of cheat yourself by jumping over those hurdles without truly learning that step, it's going to catch up to you. It's going to catch up to you really quick, and it's going to make it harder for you to succeed at the next step. And one of the ways that it's going to make it extra hard is that when I see you struggling at a particular step, my first assumption is going to be that your struggles are caused by that step. But if you got there by cheating on the previous step, then it's going to take me a while to figure that out and to kind of go back and go, okay, hold on, let's back up a little bit. Do you know how to do this? Show me that you know how to do this first. Let's figure out this, and then we can get to this. And that can be enormously frustrating, but also time consuming. And if there's one thing that we don't have very much of in this course, it's time. So I am designing the course with these kind of steps, which hopefully are manageable. The other trick here is trying to figure out how many stages to break up a particular learning activity, a particular goal into, to make each particular step manageable, but also not trivial. And every student is different, so I try and make my best guess, but there's probably going to be some steps which are just going to be a little bit too tall for you to do by yourself. That happens to almost every student, and the key there is that I've tried to design my steps so that 80% of my students can get over them by trying once or twice or maybe 3 times by themselves. But there's always going to be some students, and it doesn't mean you're dumb, but there's always going to be some students who might not just get it. It's not clicking. And the best thing to do is to get some help, get some support, so that I can see what kind of problem you're having, and on the fly, just recalibrate the steps a little bit to help you get up. Break that one step that you can't take in a single leap into 2 steps, and make sure that you get the first one, and then, okay, the second one then becomes much easier and much less overwhelming. So that's a key thing that you're going to need to keep in mind as you go through these module stages. They're intended to be all accomplishable steps without kind of constant attention and monitoring from me, but on occasion, it's really going to have to be, you are going to have to take it upon yourself to realize, wait, this step seems a lot harder than the last couple that I've been on. Maybe it would be efficient, maybe it would be good strategy for me to reach out and get some help for it. Okay. In this course, what the end goal is for the thing that I've scaffolded, spend the most time thinking about scaffolding, is the end goal is to substantially increase and change your way of thinking about real life arguments. Now, real life arguments are super complex, and you already know quite a lot about how to cope with real life arguments. You're already pretty smart, pretty clever at evaluating arguments and understanding them and figuring out whether they work or not. So it's actually to get you to the next level of being able to really be a sophisticated argument understander. That's a pretty big leap. And so some of the stages, the big stages, are the modules. So first, I have a module where we're going to look at a listicle, and a listicle is a list-based article, which is one of those clickbaity kinds of things that are all over the internet. And I picked that because they're kind of like training wheels. They're a super easy, basic, very simple kind of argument. So it'll be easy for us to understand the basic steps to mapping and evaluating an argument, and also an easy subject for us to use to start using the tools of argument analysis, because we're going to use a special kind of software to use to map out the argument. So starting with a very simple and superficial argument is going to make it such that you can just focus on the job of learning the tools and learning kind of the procedure before we increase the difficulty of the actual arguments. And we're going to do that after you succeed at mapping and evaluating the listicle by mapping and evaluating an essay of yours, or by finding a real life editorial, so a nicely kind of written and sensible and coherent argument from a newspaper or a blog post or something like that. And then after you've done that, we won't have any time in this course to actually have you go and do real life arguments, that is real life dynamic discussions with other people, and use the tools that we've learned here there. But I'm hoping that by climbing this far up the ladder, that you, after this course, will be able to make this last step on your own. Okay. The third learning theory or learning concept that I'm using to design this course, in my approach to teaching this course and having you learn in this course, is something called Bloom's taxonomy. So if you're in teacher ed and you've taken a couple of the foundational courses in teacher ed, you might have seen or heard of Bloom's taxonomy. It shows up in different kinds of shapes. This is one way of presenting the taxonomy, the hierarchy of different kinds of knowing, but there are other ones. The key thing about the course is that, is that the key insight to Bloom's taxonomy is that there are different kinds of knowledge, different ways of knowing, different things that you can know, and some things, some knowing activities, some knowing skills are really, really easy to learn. Coincidentally or not coincidentally, they're also easy to test. And so that kind of unfortunate relationship also explains a lot of your schooling to date, because most of what you've had to do up till now has been the easy stuff, has been just remembering a whole bunch of information. You guys are actually really pretty scarily good at this stuff. You're good at remembering for the test, you're good at recalling and then regurgitating that information on the test, whether it's multiple choice or short answer, those kinds of things. Unfortunately, lots of memory is kind of short term, so you walk out of the test and a week later 90% of it is gone. That kind of knowledge, though it's easy to gain, it's also easy to lose, and it's not very powerful because it's just information, and information is pretty inert. It doesn't have a lot of activity to it. It doesn't have a lot of impact in your ability to navigate the world. In contrast, as we go up this taxonomy and ascend to kind of higher order thinking and higher order knowledge, it gets more difficult, but the payoff is that as you are able to do some of the more difficult kinds of knowing or ways of thinking, the payoff is that you're able to do more with them, right? You can do more if you master evaluation and analysis, or if you master the application of a particular area of knowledge, than if you just remember the key facts. And so while there will be things definitely to remember in this course, and there will be times when it might look like all I'm asking you to do is remember stuff, particularly say for readings, where you know that while you are getting some points by doing the readings, there's also points on offer for quizzes after the readings. Don't approach those kinds of tests of your knowledge as if they are tests just of remembering. You probably will get the points, most of them. But the quizzes and stuff, though they will be fairly basic, are trying to push you up the scale here. And so later tests, later assignments are going to be hopefully building up and expecting performances that are up here rather than down here. And overall, the intent of the course, the kinds of things that I'm trying to teach you, the tools of thinking, the ways of thinking about arguments and mapping them and visualizing them, are there to help you become more capable to make the harder things here easier to do with arguments in your major when you start learning deep facts about your major, when you start learning about particular viewpoints, approaches, theories, those kinds of things, and you have to start developing your own expert judgment as a senior about conclusions and controversies in your particular field of expertise. Becoming an expert is not about knowing a lot of stuff or remembering a lot of stuff. It's about gaining judgment. And that's really the difference between stuff at the top here and stuff at the bottom here. And so this course is encouraging you, maybe not requiring you, but at least encouraging you to develop knowledge and thinking at the higher orders rather than just down here. And so if you approach it that way, it might be a little bit trickier at the start, but hopefully you'll see the payoff pretty soon if you take the kind of learning I'm asking you to do seriously at the upper levels and don't just have the ambition to just remember things temporarily. And that, I appreciate, that can be hard. In order to kind of drive home the point of those things, and particularly of the last three things that I've talked about in terms of learning theory, but particularly the usefulness of the higher order thinking, I have just a little kind of, not exactly fun, but hopefully an interesting, at least in retrospect, exercise. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is you can pause the video after I've finished kind of describing the thing and stare at these for as long as you like. Do whatever kind of typical studying you do when you are trying to remember things for a test. And then after you have finished studying these things, and you think you're kind of ready for a test that is going to test how well that you have memorized these symbols, I'm going to ask you to close the video and go find the quiz that will now be available for you on Canvas and take that test without cheating. Okay? Now I can't tell whether or not you will have kept this video open and kept this freeze frame open so that you can see the chart with the symbols and the letters on it. And I can't tell whether you have just neatly handwritten them yourself, right? I can't force you to make this a closed book test. I'm just asking you, we're trying to pretend here. I'm giving you a kind of a little pretend example of the typical mindless memorize a lot of stuff so that you can perform well on a test that's directed towards memorization. As this is, I'm asking you to trust me a little bit here and just go through the motions of that, do that sort of thing, take the test, and then after you've taken the test, I'm going to use it and your performance on it to give you a little bit of direct personal experience feedback on that difference between the lower order thinking skills of memorization and the higher order thinking skills of analysis and evaluation and those sorts of things. So I would say if you should be able to get a pretty good job. Don't waste a lot of time here. 5 minutes of trying to memorize these things. You can do whatever you typically do to study to memorize these things. Do that 5 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to do these two things right here. This stuff is going to be on a Canvas quiz, which should be the next thing open in the module that this video is in. So find that test, do these two things. I think the test has a time limit on it, and then once you have done that, it will unlock the second part of this video where I will give you the answers, and then we can discuss the answers and how difficult it was to get them. All right, so I will see you soon on the other side of the test.